Welcome, and thank you for coming to our second speaker of the speaker series. We are delighted to have with us tonight Mr. Gary White, an alumnus of this wonderful university, a graduate of our civil engineering program. Mr. White is the CEO and co-founder of Water.org and Water Equity, two nonprofit organizations dedicated to empowering people to gain access to safe water and sanitation. In his book, Forged in Gold, Missouri S&T's First 150 Years, University historian Dr. Larry Gregg, who's in the audience, writes, "Through Water.org, Gary White had a greater impact on the world than any other miner." After graduating from O'Hara High School in Kansas City, Missouri, Gary enrolled at Missouri S&T, then named the University of Missouri Rolla, or as we all know it, UMR. He earned bachelor's and master's degree in civil engineering in 1985 and 1987, respectively, and holds a master's degree in environmental engineering from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. It was during a service trip to Guatemala in 1984 as an S&T undergraduate student that Gary was inspired to make clean water and sanitation his life's work. He saw a girl getting contaminated water from a rusty barrel and walking along a stream of open sewage back to her home, and he knew something had to be done. Gary and his Water.org co-founder Matt Damon were named the Time magazine's list of the world's 100 most influential people. Gary developed Water.org's water credit solution that credits financing options for poor populations to meet their water supply and sanitation needs. He also developed and leads Water Equity, an investment manager dedicated to ending the global water crisis with a focus on mobilizing private investments in water and sanitation throughout Asia, Africa, and Latin America. Bringing more than 30 years of experience to work on solving the global water and sanitation crisis, Gary is a leading advisor in water and sanitation. He has consulted organizations such as IKEI Foundation, Amazon Web Services, and Bank of America on responses to the global water crisis. To date, Gary's work has empowered more than 60 million people with access to safe water and sanitation across 19 countries, providing resources and solutions to greatly improve the quality of life. It is my honor to welcome Mr. Gary White.
Well, good evening. Thank you, Chancellor, for the introduction. I also want to, I've been on campus most of the day today. I also want to thank Joel Birkin, who's here, for orchestrating so much of that today and the time I was able to spend with some of the students here. It is almost surreal to be back in Rolla after decades away. I have made a couple of short stops here over the years, but I'm just really honored and humbled to be delivering this lecture tonight, something I never dreamed I would be doing when I was a student here at Rolla. In fact, it seems like I barely got out with a diploma back then, but that's a different story. So if you want more detail, go look at the commencement address I delivered a few years ago. So I just want to talk tonight, about my passion and what my journey has been since I left Rolla and went headlong into this career to focus on water and sanitation. And there is an interesting, I hope interesting story to tell, and I can connect you to the arc of that as we go through the slides. But it is really, you know, I didn't know what kind of feelings would come about coming back into Rolla to talk about this, but I think what has already struck me today and meeting some of the folks here is just like how much it did all start right here, and how much influence there was on me here, and how much of what you'll see is what started here, and the dedication of the faculty and the staff, administration that give opportunity for things like this to take root. So, starting with the video.
For some people, getting water is as easy as turning on the faucet. But for millions of others, it is a daily struggle that dominates their lives. This is the global water crisis, and it is the most urgent social challenge of our time. I'm Matt Damon, co-founder of Water.org. For more than 30 years, we've made it our mission to empower people in need with sustainable access to safe water and sanitation at home. We can't solve other global challenges without investing in water. Water is the best investment the world can make to empower women, fight climate change, improve health, and end poverty. Right now, millions of people are paying high prices for water from vendors or collecting water from unsafe natural sources. Both options cost families in time, money, opportunities, and health. What if they didn't have to? What if they could get access to the funds needed to give their families a long-term safe water solution at home and a private place to go? They can. Water.org breaks down the financial barriers between people living in poverty and the safe water and toilet they need to survive and thrive. Our solutions are smart, simple, and sustainable. We work with our in-country financial partners to add loans for water and sanitation solutions to their portfolios. These partners then mobilize funds from capital markets to provide affordable loans to people in need of water. People living in poverty use these loans for solutions such as taps, toilets, storage tanks, or piped connections in their homes. Repaid loans create the opportunity for another family to finance the solutions they need fast and affordably. This solution is scalable. It changes more lives faster and more efficiently. Millions stand ready to change their families' lives through this proven, powerful approach, and you can make it happen. Now is the time to invest in water. For people, for progress, and for possibility. The future of families around the world depends on it. Join us today at water.org.
So, just wanted to show that brief video as kind of an introduction and kind of as a primer to get ready for the rest of the lecture. I hesitate to call it a lecture. I don't know if I've ever given a lecture, but I guess that's what this is. I'm used to speaking, but not lecturing, so hopefully they're interchangeable. So just starting a little bit, you know, with the roots here. And when I was a student here, I was really drawn to international work, and actually the influence of Dr. Bobby Wixon, who I just spoke with today. He just turned 92, and he was recalling when we were working together on some initial international projects, and I started an organization with his support and the support of some other faculty that would match engineering students here with development projects around the world. And the support that I received from the faculty on that to help us raise funds and go out and provide that kind of support to development projects was really a boost for me from the faculty here to believe in it and help raise those funds. So I consider it kind of the forerunner of the Engineers Without Borders. And that was a seminal event in my life to be able to travel to Guatemala and to the Philippines while I was here to do that kind of work. And that really kind of set the stage for like being curious You know, curiosity is one of the most important traits I think that we can have about how to look a problem like that in the eye and be curious about how do you provide solutions? How do you see things differently maybe than the status quo and form hypotheses about what can be done to change it? And that kind of, you know, almost scientific method, if you will, being able to apply that to something like a gnarly problem like global access to water and sanitation, which doesn't exist today. All of that kind of, you know, that was the crucible in which kind of I was shaped here and the trajectory that I took. So if we look at what is the source really of that inspiration, it's the fact that this reality, I mean, this is really unconscionable, right? That we should live on a planet and that we should have achieved a standard of living that we have, and yet still hundreds of millions of people are left behind because they lack something that, you know, we have at the turn of the tap. And what is really, you know, for me, the inspiration is that the problem is so big and yet so solvable. And when you think about it, everyone in the world, when they woke up today, had to get water somewhere. You know, we all got it because we got out of bed and turned on a tap. But everybody had to get water somewhere, right? Or else they wouldn't survive. The question is, how did they pay for that? What did they pay for that? What did that cost them? And what we realize is that it can cost in terms of hours spent walking to collect water, hours that could have otherwise been spent in productive income-generating activities. It costs in terms of health. You know, drinking contaminated water, dysentery, typhoid, all those things that come along with that, the health cost, and then not being able to work because you're sick. And then there's the cash cost as well. For many people who live in urban areas in particular that aren't connected to the water grid, they're paying up to 25% of their income to buy water from these water trucks that serve as vendors, not even high quality water. So what we see in this is tremendous, what I call coping costs that have to be borne by some of the poorest people on the planet just to get what we take for granted. And so to me, this is kind of the anchor in the story. This is the starting point. This is like what I was encountering when I first got out of Missouri S&T and went into this work. And now I just want to take you through the journey a little bit. So when you see a problem like this as an engineer, you try to break it down and figure out how to create a solution that fits the problem. And for me, you know, I did my degrees here in civil engineering because I thought this was going to be a civil engineering problem. I thought that I was going to be, you know, traveling around the world and drilling wells to help people get access to water. And that, you know, that was a vision or a goal that I had for myself that got me to the stage where I could be peering over the horizon a bit more to see, well, what more is there, right? And so, but when we started, it was like, let's raise a lot of philanthropic capital. We'd host fundraising dinners. The very first one that we did back in 1990 in the parish where I grew up in Kansas City, St. Bernadette's. I just invited a bunch of family and friends together to say, let's raise money for this community I know of in Honduras that needs water. And I'll go down and take some pictures to show you that the project went in. And so we did that. We raised $4,300. And that felt good. And my family was behind it. And those are, you know, some of the roots of this. And we were looking at, you know, drilling wells and kind of those direct impact types of projects. And we were doing well at it. We were finding great partners, always working through local partners in the countries. You know, I never built, you know, a water system for water.org in my life, but we would find great local partners who could do that. But then you start looking at like, you know, what are the limitations on this, right? You know, knowing that hundreds of millions or billions of people back then didn't have access to water, That's the problem. So you look at the scale of your solution and you try to understand how it fits within the scale of the problem, and it didn't fit, right? There's no way that we were going to kind of work our way out of this global crisis just using philanthropy alone. Charity was never going to be enough to solve a multi-trillion-dollar problem. And so that's when, because of my travels and spending so much time with people who were living in water poverty, my eyes started to open up a bit more as to like discovering these coping costs that I was talking about, right? And understanding that, people were paying so much for water on a daily basis, but they couldn't afford a few $100s to get a more permanent solution for themselves. They couldn't afford to connect to the local utility, for instance. So oftentimes, people living in these areas have the water pipes running right under their feet, but they don't have the roughly $300 or so to be able to connect to the grid. So they're paying every day for this. And it gets to one of the insights I'll talk about later, that it's really expensive to be poor because you don't have working capital, even $300 to get you over a hump that's robbing you of 25% of your income, every day, potentially. And so it's like, people are paying for water. They're paying in terms of their health, their time, their cash. And it's like, what if instead of it all being about charity, we could help people get access to affordable loans so that they could solve the problem in the way that best fits their needs, so that they're in charge of their own water and sanitation solution. And that was kind of the birth of what we now call water credit. And we knew that we didn't want to start a bank ourselves, but we also knew at this time the concept of microfinance was starting to take off. Muhammad Yunus, who pioneered the concept of microfinance and won the Nobel Prize for that, thought it was a good investment to invest in women to start small businesses. And it really worked. It was taking off. And so my concept was like, let's go talk to all these microfinance institutions, MFIs, that's the one acronym you need to remember tonight, MFIs, and let them know these are going to be good loans because of all these coping costs. And knocked on a lot of doors around the world to say, look, this is something you should be loaning money for. And the doors were all slammed in my face because they're like, no, what we make loans for is like a sewing machine. We make a loan to a woman for a sewing machine, and by the end of the week, she's sewing clothes and selling them, and she has cash flow. We'll make a loan for a cow, because by the end of the week, you're selling milk and then maybe selling cheese. It's like, this is what we do as MFIs. We make loans for businesses. And so you had to then say, okay, you run into a wall. This is what being an entrepreneur is about. You run into a wall, so what do you do about that? Well, what we did is we were so convinced, we said, well, we will take on your risk for you. We will de-risk you lending for toilets and you lending for water connections. And so that's what we did. We used our philanthropic capital catalytically to be able to encourage these MFIs to make eventually millions of small loans for water and sanitation and create a business for them. So that's exactly what was the birth of water credit. And now we've reached over 60 million people with access to small loans to get water and sanitation solutions for themselves. And that's churned about $4.5 billion in capital that is now unleashed to do this. And that capital historically has come from local banks around the world that have been investing in these partners to do more of these loans. And that has been key to its scaling up. And beyond that, then we recognized that these now 150 partners that we have around the world who are doing these loans are strapped for capital. So they needed more access to affordable capital. And so that's when we looked at what's the next problem. We knew that in fact, the way this played out was Matt and I were in India talking to these partners, and after we met with them and we heard that this is what they need, we're in the back of a Jeep, and he's like, we can raise more capital in the US if we borrow instead of just using it all philanthropically. And so he's like, I'll put in the first $1 million and we'll launch a fund. We'll create a fund where people can get a financial return, and then we'll take those funds and we'll loan these to our partners around the world so that they can scale this up even more, because we saw a bottleneck, and we have to apply that entrepreneurial approach to it. And so in the same way, we are fortunate that we intersected with this microfinance concept at the time and could kind of ride its coattails. We believe that we could intersect with social impact investing, which was starting to really take root in the US and Europe. And social impact investing is, yes, you get a financial return when you invest in something, but you also get social impact. Sometimes you have to trade off a little bit of financial return for that, sometimes you don't. But we said, let's lean into impact investing, and so then we created the first fund. We raised $11 million in that first fund, and we can't say we promised, but we intended that investors would get a 1% return on that, a very modest return. But these are people who are converting from being donors and remaining donors, but also becoming investors. And so investing and helping people get water and getting a 1% return and getting your capital back obviously sounds a lot better than give us all your money. It's a whole different way of thinking about solving the problem. And so that did work. And we've now, because of that, we've spun off a whole new organization that's called Water Equity. So Water Equity is an investment manager. Think of Fidelity or Charles Schwab or those organizations that you put your capital into. They go and invest in private equity or whatever they do, and you get your financial returns. They manage your assets. So we became, I think, the world's first water NGO to launch an asset manager. And we have to hold up in the same way to the Securities and Exchange Commission as anybody else. We have to be registered, and so we leaned into this. So it seemed like kind of a crazy idea that a nonprofit would go do this, but water credit sounded kind of crazy at the time when we wanted to do that as well, and now that has worked. So again, we were fortunate to be able to hire really great talent to run Water Equity and to manage those investments, and to then use that capital to scale up this work with MFIs. So fast forward now, and Water Equity has about $340 million of committed capital that we're using to go out and provide debt to these financial partners around the world. And we have done 4 funds now, and we'll be launching a 5th soon to scale this up even more. And we're able to provide competitive financial returns to the investors who have come in so far, and we intend to do more of that. So you can see, going back to that concept of how do you make the scale of your solution match the scale of your problem? If you're working just in philanthropy, it's never going to happen. Yeah, a lot of people can get water, but you're not going to solve the problem you set out to solve. And so by looking at the leverage of water credit, applying some philanthropy to get these small loans happening from the bottom up, and now looking at the problem even bigger, or the solution even bigger, and saying, what if we can mobilize billions of dollars of capital from the top down? What we also found was this market that was being exerted from the poor to get connected to utilities was starting to bump into a supply side problem as well, because the utilities and the companies that were providing water didn't necessarily have the investment capital they needed to get connections to all these people who had these water credit loans. So that was the other aspect of this that we were looking at. The solution to match the scale of the problem had to be not just from the bottom up, but also from the top down, freeing up capital in new ways to be able to help people to get the solutions that were best for them. As we started to do this, we noticed that a lot of these financial partners were starting to make different kinds of loans. They were going out and finding small utilities, entrepreneurs who were providing services to water utilities and who were doing water service and sanitation services. And they started using some of the capital we provided to invest in them. And this then sparked new ideas for us, where we then started getting into the infrastructure projects with these utilities. We've worked with these small utilities in Indonesia called PDAMs, and we provide them with support into the local financial structure so that they can get loans from local banks, helping them build up their business plans and design their systems so that they can then get the capital that they need. We're doing this in Kenya with a bank called Family Bank. I just was there a few months ago, and these folks who run these small utilities are so passionate about getting water to everyone in their community, and they're capital constrained. They're saying, look, we could move this pipe network much farther into more homes. What we need $10,000 to sink another well because we don't have the capacity. And then we need some funding to build another water tank so we can serve more people. It's like, can you help us do this? And so we work with them, with technical assistance and support, and the local bank, Family Bank, to get them to the point where they're a good risk. And so our investment of water equity into Family Bank now is translating into new types of work in infrastructure. And so that gets to the next stage of this. So what's the next problem we face? It's the problem that we face in so many ways with our planet, and that is climate. We knew that despite being able to invest in this and bring in impact investors, we knew that a lot of the work that we were doing was going to be subject to disruption because of climate change. When you think of climate change, if you think of climate change as a shark, water is the teeth of the shark. This is where it's really going to be felt the most. Water infrastructure that dries up because of drought, flooding that happens and contaminates the water supply table, desalination of water. All of these things are adding up to having our infrastructure and our work at risk. And so how can we work this from an infrastructure perspective where we have climate resilient infrastructure, where we can look at adaptation and hopefully ultimately mitigation as well in the work that we do. And the sad part is that the people that are most impacted by climate change are the ones who had the least to do with creating it in the first place. And it's the people that we see all of the time. They're on the front lines, and they're the ones that are going to expect it. They get hit the most. So staying true all this time to working with people living in poverty and low and middle income countries as we provide these new solutions and capital and working in partnership with them. So this is the next phase. We've launched a philanthropic fund that's designed to help us build up our expertise in infrastructure that's climate resilient. We've been very fortunate. Recently, we got a $10 million grant from Amazon, who was very responsive to this. And in fact, their chief sustainability officer at Amazon just joined our board of directors because they're so committed to water and climate. And then we also, just a few weeks ago, got a $10 million grant from the Bezos Earth Fund to bring the philanthropy in that we need to catalyze more investment capital and more infrastructure capital. So we're still blending that philanthropic capital into water.org in a way that allows us to leverage it with much more funding. So that's kind of the arc of where we're at now. Because we have an engineering audience, I do have a slide a little bit later where I'll talk more about that infrastructure fund that we're developing. But for now, I think just summing up a little bit where we've been with water.org to date and water equity, we are in all these countries now. And with water equity, actually, we're even in more countries. I think this just represents water.org. 60 million people reached, $4.8 billion in capital mobilized. See, I said 4.5. This is how quickly it's changing. Somebody updated my deck already for me. So 4.8 billion. And 148 active partners doing this around the world. So rewinding, stepping back a little bit about, I talked about entrepreneurship, and somebody asked me today, I think it was Joel, said, can you tell us what you are? And I said, well, I'm a social entrepreneur who's trying to figure out how to make the markets work with problems like water and sanitation that are big social issues. And so that was an insight for me today. But some of these insights are, as I mentioned before, it's expensive to be poor. And that, just the mere fact of helping someone get access to an affordable loan can set them on a whole different financial trajectory. If yesterday you were walking 3 hours to get water, and today you have a house connection, that's game changing. That's game changing, right? You're no longer getting safe water. You're no longer going to be sick as much. If your daughters were carrying water the day before, she can now be in school. The health's going to improve, and you have a chance to go work at a paying job and earn additional money for your family. So helping people get out of this poverty trap. And of course, people should participate in their own solutions. There is, unfortunately, a very high project failure rate for kind of supply-driven projects around the world, where it is more just a traditional, we'll drill the well for you, cut the ribbon, you're welcome. Those projects don't tend to succeed as much. And we know that no one's ever going to take out a loan for a solution that they don't value. This creates value for them, and they're the arbiter of what is valuable for them, and they can make these decisions on their own. And then we've got to continue. We are a very philanthropic country. That always resonates with me, and we have to raise a lot of philanthropic capital to make this happen. And, for example, in order to launch water equity so that it would be successful as an asset manager, we needed to pump $10 million to start into that so that we could hire the staff, the expertise in asset management, and build the investment pipeline. Because if we didn't do that in advance, there's no way investors were going to come in and invest in our fund. It's like, why would we invest in your fund? You don't even have staff who know how to do this. So you can always find ways to use philanthropy catalytically. It's basically the equivalent of going out to Silicon Valley and pitching a VC funder. It's like, we have a venture idea, but this particular venture idea can't work off of like a strict investment. We need philanthropy as the angel to come in and do this, and that's what we're able to do. Philanthropy can be the angel investor that gets these things set into motion. And then also, of course, I've talked throughout about partnerships and partners, these financial partners, philanthropic partners. We've been very fortunate lately to add to the roles of water equity investors, Starbucks, Microsoft, Ecolab, DuPont, the list, Caterpillar. And what these corporates now see is this is a great place to invest in a way that you can use your balance sheet as opposed to all your philanthropy. You can work to be better water stewards in the areas where you operate around the world. You can help millions of people get access to water, and you have the potential to be not only repaid, but also earn a competitive financial return. It's kind of a no-brainer for a lot of corporations who want to then get into this work, and we're trying to be the right channel for all of that. Partnerships all the way around. So now, for the more engineering side of this is an interesting point of departure for us, because we've been working with financial institutions for years, and now we're going to be working with infrastructure projects. And some of those have been kind of smaller scale that I talked about earlier, but we also recognize that we want to be able to invest bigger in infrastructure to direct more capital into all the places along the water and sanitation value chain. And so Water Equities Fund that we've just launched, it'll be the first one that's not focused on kind of the MFI work, but it's focused on investing in infrastructure, both through projects. So we'll start a project development function as part of water.org that will be out there developing investable projects with utilities, with private companies that have concessions to run utilities in different countries. And we'll also be looking at growth companies. So the types of entrepreneurs and smaller and medium enterprises that are serving water and sanitation utility infrastructure. For instance, the concept of water losses in utilities is a huge problem. We are operating in countries where 35% of the water is lost, either because it's leaking from the pipes or people aren't being properly billed for that. And so all of that water that's leaking out of the system is really carbon leaking out of the system. There's nothing that you consume as a consumer that has more mass than water. Moving water mass over a distance is energy. I can do that in this crowd, right? Mass over, what is that? Is that somebody who knows that? And that all has a huge carbon footprint. And imagine if like 1/3 of your carbon footprint produced no economic value to anyone. That's the low-hanging fruit of carbon and getting the planet decarbonized. Looking at areas, like if you get in a plane, like I flew to Boston last week for our board meeting, yeah, I had a carbon footprint, but I was able to deliver value associated with that. That's one thing, but to have a carbon footprint for the water sector and deliver no economic value, that's criminal, right? That's the low-hanging fruit. Those are the kinds of companies that are looking at leak detection and leak repair and working with utilities that we want to invest in. Just a few examples, there's a lot more, but we will be investing across this value chain in both those larger scale projects designed to reach people with more water and sanitation, and then also the growth companies. And we're able to do this because we can marry the philanthropy with water.org with the investment capital of water equity. And the reason we can use philanthropy to spark these deals is because if we don't do that, these deals will not happen. If they don't have the technical assistance that they need in order to become bankable from the capital markets, they're never going to get the capital. So we're able to use philanthropic capital as part of our social mission to bring these deals to the point where they are bankable, where they are investable, so that the capital markets can respond. And we're putting this all under one roof between water.org and the new project development work we'll be doing with the new entity and with water equity. And that's really allowing us to really raise these funds and deploy them at a rate that is really baffling for most other investors to see how quickly we can get this out in the pipeline. And so what we're doing with infrastructure right now is the same thing we did with water equity. You know, we have this philanthropic capital from some of the donors I mentioned. We've built out most of the expertise we already need on the ground to be able to do this type of work because we haven't been doing it before, right? Again, we're hiring ahead of the curve. We're gaining that experience, putting the right people in place so that the investors will say, yes, I believe they can do this because they are putting this in place before we put in our investment capital. And that's the secret to like marrying the philanthropic with the investment to make this all work. All of that comes down to this, right? It's been a long journey. It's been one that, we talk a lot about running into roadblocks every point along the way and then clearing them. We talk about moving fast. We talk about immersing ourselves and then iterating rather than getting to the problem all at once. Immerse, iterate, again, another engineering thing that we've learned. And then, if you look at the complexity of it that I've talked about, it doesn't really matter so much that you understand every nook and cranny. I didn't understand it for a long time. But what happens is this, right? If you can succeed either in, just doing a well or water credit or a water equity or, infrastructure, it all comes down to this. This is what, at the end of the pipe, means. And having this social impact for people. And I really believe water and access to water is the foundation of all human development, including human economic development. And this is what we're trying to unleash. So, summing up with the work that we've done, there's a lot of women's empowerment with this as well. If you want to have a loan repaid, make the loan to a woman. That's another lesson to learn. They're the ones who are fetching the water. 75% of the people who've benefited live in rural areas. 88% live under the poverty line. And as you can see, the world's poor are the best credit risk out there with a 98% repayment rate across all of our partner network for water credit. And then really bringing into the very human level. This is Mama Florence. I never did even get her first name. She was a grandmother. She just went by Mama Florence. She lives in Uganda. And Mama Florence before she took out a water credit loan from one of our local partners, would have to get on her bike every day with these jerry cans and go and search for water for her family. And she had grandchildren even that she was doing this for. And so every day she was forced to spend hours trying to get water that her family, an extended family, needed to survive. And she heard about this through one of our partners, and she took out a loan. It was about $300. She was able to sink a small well and get a pump involved and then get this water tank in place. And so what she was able to do, she took this water, and again, this is why it's a foundation. She didn't just use it, for her family to drink. She started watering a garden with the water as well. So she was growing vegetables, healthier food for her family. And then with some of the waste from the agriculture, she started using it to feed the pigs that she was then raising for her family and to sell. And then she lived in an area where she recognized the soil could be made into bricks. So she used the water to start making bricks and selling bricks. And then she recognized that, people could use houses that they could rent or small rooms that they could rent. So she used the bricks and built these small rooms on her property that she was then renting out to people in Uganda that needed a place. Entrepreneurship in this country is great, but it's nothing compared to Mama Florence. This woman is an entrepreneur, and the reason she could have that entrepreneurial spirit unleashed is because she had access to water. And that is why water is so fundamental. Now, multiply Mama Florence by 60 million people, and we're not just helping people get water, we're helping them change the trajectory of their lives and of their children, and in her case, her grandchildren, who she's now able to send to school as well. So I think I'll leave it at that. I know we can do some Q&A, but it'd be interesting to see if anybody can scan that QR code from a distance. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Wow, what a cool story. Thank you very much, Gary. Appreciate it. And frankly, almost emotional listening to what one graduate of this university has done and what everyone else could also do. So I'd like to introduce our Dr. Joel Birkin, the chair of our Civil, Architectural, and Environmental Engineering, who's going to be the moderator for the question and answer session. So Dr. Birkin is a Curator's Distinguished Professor and the Chair of Civil, Environmental, and Architectural Engineering at S&T. And if you have any questions, please pass it on, and Joel will ask Gary, and you get your answer. Thank you, Joel.
Thank you, Gary, for turning in such an inspirational story. This started here, many years ago, and I think you mentioned it previously, but I bet Paul Munger and Jerry Bayless and Bobby Wixon taught you a lot, but they didn't teach you what you're doing here. How did that influence you?
Well, I think for me, I still had to get my engineering degree, right? I was doing a lot of other things on the side when I was here as well. But it definitely was an influence for me that, you have to be grounded in something, in a profession. And I was fortunate that they helped ground me in a profession in a way that wasn't just about the equations and the math. And if it had been, I would have never made it, by the way. Math. Once I finished my last calc course, I was on the honor roll every semester. Before that, I was on academic probation. So we'll set that aside for a different day. But knowing that it was beyond just the equations, and how do you critically think about solving a problem? How do you make a solution more efficient, more impactful. And I think, as engineers, we sit at this juncture between kind of basic science and, the rest of the world and what needs to be delivered as goods, services, water. And I think being in that space, we're all challenged to try to think of how do we deliver more to society per dollar that gets invested. And I think that kind of runs through this for me as a theme. And I think that's what we as engineers are about turning the theoretical into the practical and serving people's needs.
That's great, and that leads into another one that was offered. Experiential learning at this university is big. It's a requirement now. Did you have internships or co-ops or other experiences as a student that helped shape you into a career in humanitarian services and to making the world a better place?
No, I didn't. I mean, next question. No. But what I did do was kind of create my own internship, if you will, right? When I started this organization that would match engineering students with what was DePauw University in Greencastle, Indiana. I won't go into too much detail, but right before I arrived at Rolla to start studying, another person left, and that was Fred Lamar, who was leading these these engineering trips. He was a campus minister, but he was like taking students to Honduras and places like that to build projects. And it's like, damn, I got here a little too late. And so I contacted Fred Lamar, and he was now at DePauw, where he had only liberal arts students. And I was like, Fred, what if I matched some engineering students up with your teams, because he had all the infrastructure. They were going out and doing these projects around the world. They were doing, they had winter term break from, January after Christmas until they came back to school. They would send teams of students out around the world to do medical clinics, dental clinics, and construction projects. And so what I was able to do is kind of create my own internship by attaching myself to those teams and then giving the opportunity for other engineering students here to attach themselves to those teams as well. So yes, it basically created an internship that was maybe best for me.
Yeah. Entrepreneur even in your own education. And along the way, with those experiences, when did you know that you were going to have to start something new on your own? That it wasn't the vehicle you were in at that time. It wasn't that organization. It was something else, because you've reinvented and reinvented and reinvented. Every time you had to say, what if, you answered it with something new. Where did that start?
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of it, because like I said, I was convinced it was going to be purely an engineering solution, and it is an engineering solution to these problems, but it was also that plus more, and that was financial solutions. And when I went back to graduate school in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, and there was a program there that was focused on water and sanitation in low-income countries. It had a partnership with the World Bank, and they had really great faculty focusing specifically on this. And that's where my eyes were open to, like, the financial side of this. There were faculty there doing studies on willingness to pay for water and sanitation, contingent valuation analysis, to really understand, is there a potential for people, and is there a willingness and an ability to pay for water? And learning in that environment and seeing some of that research got me thinking about that as well. And so I had that academic kind of, what if with me when I then started going out and meeting people who were experiencing it firsthand in their water poverty, how they were paying for it. So I would say, it was an evolution rather than a revolution for me to be armed with that kind of academic knowledge, and then to see it playing out in the real world, and then seeing there is something here that can be turned into a whole new way of approaching the problem, and that was water credit.
Excellent. And you've obviously done a lot, and then the people you've worked with, the organization you've created has made a big difference. But our public should and could do more. What are your biggest challenges when you're trying to educate the public about the value of water or water shortages when, like you said, we wake up and it's at the tap, but yet it's mobilizing those people and essentially society to solve this for the rest of the planet.
Yeah. It is a heavy lift, you know. It's something that we don't stop to think about because it is at the turn of the tap for us. When we think about other kind of global issues, you know, health challenges, cancer, HIV/AIDS, and others, like we all know people, you know, who have experienced those crises. And so that kind of causes us to open our hearts and our pocketbooks more. And, you know, global issues are even more of a challenge to get people to focus on. But I do think, you know, it is, you know, we've tried very hard to tell the story in a way that is, we feel, compelling, and it is, and people respond. I mean, we do raise large amounts of philanthropic capital because people respond to it. Matt and I talk about this all the time. You know, you think, oh, I know how we can reach more people to give. We'll just go find an A-list Hollywood celebrity, and that'll solve all the problems. No, it doesn't. And you know, luckily, you know, that wasn't our plan. I didn't seek to do that. We found each other, so that was. But it helps. It certainly helps. You know, it opens a lot of doors for us, and you know, because it has been a vexing problem, we wrote a book. You know, The Worth of Water, and yeah, it hit the Wall Street Journal bestseller list for a while, but I don't think it's lighting up Amazon right now, unless all of you go and buy it tonight. Then that should help. So.
Can we run that QR code again? We got to get that. And on that, so I do want to come back to the partnership that you formed. But how can we as an educational institution and as education overall, especially when we're focused on the sustainability and environmental aspects and health aspects in a lot of ways, how can we better train, educate our students to be leaders that are aware of the water issues and other societal level problems? And I will say one thing that's always compelling to me when you say the water system and supplying water is I've learned to follow that up with that means health, prosperity, dignity, education. It's not just water. Yeah. It's all those other things that you talked about. But how do we, again, as a society, train the next generation to really embrace this and the next, you know, global societal issues that we're going to face?
Yeah, it's. I think it's happening, right? I think it has been happening. You know, for me, all of it was rooted in my initial experience here. So obviously something right was being done back then, and I think even more so now. And I think of all, you know, the concept of a social entrepreneur, that term hadn't even been coined, you know, back in the day. I didn't even know I was a social entrepreneur until I went to the Skoll Foundation has this social entrepreneurial gathering at Oxford, England, and it's like I went there for the first one, and I discovered I was a social entrepreneur. Now, I think, you know, there's probably students in this room who are thinking about how can I be a social entrepreneur, and I think that we have awakened more to some of these global needs, the concept of the Sustainable Development Goals, the 17 goals that the planet and the UN has set forward is to focus on. Those are front and center. Those are in corporations. I mean, that's the reason we're able to raise the money from the corporate partners is because they've all signed up to attack these Sustainable Development Goals. Goal number 6 is access to water and sanitation. So even if you aren't out starting an organization and being entrepreneurial about this, I can tell you the companies that you are working in are going to be tuned into this, into things like the ESG, the environmental, social, and governance score of their company. Why? Because their institutional investors that own their stock are going to start selling their stock unless they get higher ESG scores, because that's what consumers are responding to. So there's ways to channel yourself in, even if you're, I know we've worked a lot with the people at Stella Artois and Anheuser-Busch InBev, ABI. And what I met there and working with them over the past 7 years is like they have these entrepreneurs there that are able to focus on some of these problems as well. So I think the continuing to educate people to, you know, be technical specialists, but also to invest in it emotionally and, you know, finding a niche in the world that is right for you. And for me, I've always talked about, you know, this should be about finding the intersection between the world's greatest need and your greatest passion. And that, to me, is what drives me. But, you know, your passion can be working inside of a company that is socially responsible and providing good products and good services, and then also, you know, helping outside that company or within it. So it's not a very satisfying answer, I'm sure, but that's what I got.
No, that's spot on. It is happening, and I think the generation is leading it, and now they have a lot more tools and a lot more role models, I'd say, to follow up on that. And you mentioned Matt, and from my understanding, you had Water Partners, was successful, doing some really great work, and you had water.org on the shelf. Mm-hmm. And then how did you meet Matt Damon? Mm-hmm. And that really launched, exponential growth and your impact. And how did that partnership form, and how did water.org become what it is today?
Yeah. So initially, yes, I had co-founded Water Partners at that church basement dinner I talked about in Kansas City. Then, when I was at Carolina, when the internet started to take off, and I knew that we were going to be doing more fundraising and wanted to start an NGO. And so I got online and Googled, no, I didn't Google, there was no Google. I don't know, I think I was on AOL, and there was a web, I think it must have been an email address. You send an email and say, I want to reserve, a URL. And so I tried water.org. And, or a day or two later or whatever, it's like, pay your $7.95 and you've got the URL. You had to pay internet to do that. So we had the URL, and we were actually using that for Water Partners. But then, that's the backstory. Then Matt was introduced to me by a mutual colleague who also had gone to Carolina. The Alumni magazine there was doing a story on this guy who was running across the Sahara Desert. So he had a really interesting story, right? He was starting in the Atlantic coast and running all the way to the east coast of Africa. And Matt's company was doing a documentary on it called Running the Sahara. So this ultra athlete and I met each other through the Alumni magazine. And what they had done shortly before I met them was they had started their own nonprofit called H2O Africa because, running across the desert, you recognize there's some need for water out here. And so they said, we shouldn't just run through this and be gone. Let's set up an organization that will help some of the communities get access to water. And so that was in the works. Matt and I then met at the Clinton Global Initiative in 2008. And it's in the book. There's a story there. And then we really clicked, and it's just like, H2O Africa is pretty good at raising money, but we haven't done a lot of projects. You guys have done a lot of projects, and you really need some money. So we decided let's work together for a year and see how it goes, and then it went really well. And so we merged the two organizations, rebranded it as water.org, and he and I became the co-founders.
Outstanding, and it's really launched since then. Was there a tipping point where it really accelerated at that? I mean, because now we see that 6 million came a lot faster after 50 million than 50 came after 40.
Yeah. No, I would say there's definitely a couple of tipping points. I think one was once we recognized that people would take out these household level loans and repay them at an astonishing rate, and we knew that we had financial partners out there who could scale this up. That became a tipping point because we had a lot of corporate donors. PepsiCo Foundation, for instance, we're the largest grant they ever made. Caterpillar Foundation, IKEA Foundation. And what they understood was that if we want to have impact in the world, and we're using philanthropy, we want to be able to tell the biggest story possible for every dollar that we put in of philanthropy. And our model allowed us to use that dollar of philanthropy, leverage the private capital to come in, and then they then see the benefit in terms of maybe 5x more people getting access to water that they can publicize with their employees and with the public, et cetera. So these corporates really understood a good value, when they had it, and that allowed us to really have this scaling inflection point there. So that was one. When we had proof of concept enough to ignite the philanthropy. And then certainly with water equity, doing that first fund that was kind of a friends and family fund and, 1% target return, once that fund started to prove out, and then we could build a track record as an asset manager, you really need at least a 3-year track record in order to be able to bring in, a diverse set of investors. And so once we kind of proved out that first fund would work, and now, to have $340 million in committed capital going into this, I mean, that's 10x our annual budget of water.org. And the impact of that is pretty tremendous. And I think, one thing I meant to mention, if we had stayed doing that initial type of work of kind of direct impact and drilling wells and hadn't pivoted to water credit, it would have taken us 400 years to reach the same number of people that we're reaching now. So it's pretty stark when you can create the financial plumbing that creates the capital, that connects the capital markets to a woman making $6 a day. That is a pretty amazing bit of leverage.
I think your final words there are pretty amazing. Wraps up a lot of things about your career and what's happened since those early days here. And I just want to say, Gary's somewhat of an international rock star in the water world, no question about it. And he's always got something exceedingly compelling on his plate to do and opportunities to go. And I just want to say thank you for giving your days up to drive down here and to be with our students today and to be with the audience tonight, because paying it forward the way you were inspired by others is definitely going to happen here. And the last question is, would you stay as a professor of social? It's on the card. Really.
If you can put in like a nice airport here, maybe I could swing that. I could be adjunct or
are we on the airport? No. But truly on.
And I want to thank you, Joel. I mean, this guy here has been an incredible champion of our work for the last several years and have been introducing me to all kinds of people and telling the story. So I think you're one of our best advocates yourself. So thank you for that.
Thank you. So on behalf of the audience, let's thank Gary for his time.